So this is the last video in which we're going to be adding new parts to the song. And what we're going to do here is handle some of the effect sounds. We'll use these primarily when we're arranging. We'll make the most use of those. But I just want to kind of get them in the session view here and get them all set up. The first thing I want to do is create a, it's basically a drum rack preset I made for myself that I want to share with all of you, that I use all the time for crash cymbal effect sounds, for transitions and things like that in the arrangement. And it's just using one of the samples that comes straight from Ableton Live's core library. So we'll build it together right now. So we're going to start by creating a new MIDI track, and we'll put an empty drum rack onto said MIDI track. So we'll go to the drums category, and the first thing on that list, let's just clear this out here. The first thing on that list should be just an empty drum rack, so we can drag and drop it in. And if we go to the core library, so if we go to packs and then the core library pack, which everyone should have, if you own Ableton Live, you should have the core library. In the core library, we're going to go to the folder samples, drums, subfolder cymbal, and we're just looking for the 909 crash. Now you can experiment here. If you find other ones you like, you can use whatever you want. But the 909 crash is such a staple in house music that I've decided to use it for my rack. So we're going to take it. And if I want to adhere to my GM standard here, the crash cymbal goes on, what is it? C# 2 right here. So we'll put it in on C# 2. You can put it wherever you want. Doesn't really matter. But we're going to add a few things to this. So first off, if you're loading the sample in when it created the sampler for you, if your sampler did not load with the voices set to 1, set it to 1. This is just going to prevent, if we play quick crash cymbals in succession, it's going to prevent them from overlapping and tailing on and causing a lot of mud. The other thing we're going to do is go to the controls tab, and if you don't have it set like this, I have my velocity to volume set to 25%, which seems good for me. If you want to change it, you can. I believe the default, we looked at it in a previous video, but it's totally slipping my mind right now. I think it defaults to 45% like that in just the original, if you haven't changed any of the defaults in the stock Ableton template. But I changed mine to 25. That tends to work for me. That's just, again, just means that when we play different velocities on the keyboard, it'll make the sample playback louder or quieter. And then I have my volume set to -6. And the release time I have turned all the way up, just so if I trigger it, it just plays through the entire tail of the sample. But we are going to add a few more things to this, as I said. So let me open my browser back up again. And we're going to add a reverb to this. So we'll go to audio effects, and we can just use the stock Ableton reverb. If you have a favorite reverb plugin, by all means, feel free to use it. I'm going to use the stock reverb preset. It's under Reverb Hall, and it's called Long Tail. Here it is. And we're going to just drag and drop it into the pad. However, we're going to take this, we're going to leave it 100% wet. We're going to switch the quality to high quality mode. And then we're going to take just this reverb and group it into itself to create a rack. Now bear with me for a minute. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to press Command G or Control G to put it into an audio effect rack. We can close the browser now. And then what we're going to do on this audio effect rack is we're going to open the chain view, and I'm going to change this chain's name to Wet. And then we're going to make another chain just by right-clicking down here and selecting Create Chain. We're going to call this one Dry. So what's happening now is that this crash cymbal is passing through these two parallel chains. One of them is a copy of the sound with no effect. The other is a copy of the sound with the reverb on it. And then what we can do is we can just kind of use the chain volumes here to adjust the volume levels of how much of the wet signal do we want. That's why I left this at 100% wet versus the dry signal. So if I play it back again, we can hear now a little bit less of the reverb, a little bit more of the reverb. You may also, although this reverb preset has some of the low end cut out coming in on the input processing here, you may also want to EQ this just for safety's sake. Let's just do that real quick. We'll grab an EQ8, which is here, and we're going to put it on the wet chain and just cut out the low end of the wet chain. We can probably go pretty high with this, but let me just double click on the reverb preset. That's just going to shrink it down to get it out of the way. And if I'm also going to double click on the sampler to kind of get that out of the way. And if we hit this, I just want to see what frequencies we're dealing with. Yeah, and we mostly just want to be dealing with like the mids and the high mids here. Somewhere around there should be fine. I can maybe bring it down a little bit more, but that should be fine. Just keeping that reverb chain nice and clean. Now we're going to do a few more things here. I'm going to take these chain levels and I'm going to map them to macros within this audio effect rack. So just so everyone's following me, we have a drum rack And nested with inside that drum rack on a single chain here, if I open this up, we just have this one chain with the crash cymbal. Nested inside that chain, we have an audio effect rack, right? So this audio effect rack, we're going to open the macro controls, and we're going to map the chain levels. So we'll just map this one to macro number 1. We'll map the dry level to macro number 2, and let's rename these. This can be wet level, and this can be dry level. And I don't really need to go in and change the min and max values or anything. You can see when I have map mode turned on and I have my browser open, we can change the minimum and maximum values. I don't really need to mess with that. You can if you want to. If, say, you don't ever want to pull the volume up to positive 6 dB, feel free to change that. I'm just going to leave it as is for right now. I do want the wet level to be a little bit lower, maybe around -6 or so, and the dry is going to be right at 0 dB. Okay, cool. So we've got that chain just built into the rack. And then what we're going to do is go over here to the drum rack's macro controls. So all the way over here on the far left. And we're just going to give ourselves some kind of tunability and some tweakability for this sound. So let's actually take these two macros that we mapped. Let's go ahead and map those to the outer shell to this drum rack over here. So I can just do that by simply right-clicking. I can close my browser. I can right-click here and just map this to macro 1. Now you can see, let me shrink down my simpler device. You can see my wet level macro is now mapped to the outer shell, the drum rack's macro. We're going to do the same thing with the dry level. Map to macro 2. And then the other thing I like to map here, we can kind of close down this audio effect rack. But the other thing I like to do here is on my simpler that's playing back my crash cymbal, I'm going to take the transpose control. Let's map that to another macro. We'll map it to number 3. That way we can trigger this. I'm just going to do it on my MIDI controller right now, but I can trigger this. And then just with the twist of a knob, we can change the tuning if we want. So if you're so inclined, you can kind of collapse everything down. You can save this for yourself as a drum rack preset and just use this anytime you need a quick crash cymbal for transition effects or things like that. You can tweak it from here with the transpose. You can adjust the amount of reverb using the wet level versus the dry level. So that's our rack for our crash cymbal. And let's just make a few quick variations here. Let's play just the meat of our song back. And I'm going to have one variation, and we can leave our clip grid here on 16th notes. So on this empty MIDI clip, we'll have one where we just have a crash cymbal triggered right at the beginning. I'm going to turn loop off though, so we can just trigger that, just to kind of hear it in context with all the other parts here. Let's make another one. I'm going to duplicate this, and we're going to actually extend the length of this clip. So because we're not looping it, we're going to go up here to where it says start and end in this notes box over here. If you don't see that, just make sure you have this little note button highlighted here. We're going to make this one, let's make it about 4 bars long. And I'm going to make a variation. I'll just pencil these notes in. I'm going to make a variation where I've got like a full kind of crash fill, so to speak. So what we're going to do is have a crash cymbal right at the beginning. So we'll work off a 16th note grid. That should be fine. We'll have a crash note, another crash note right at bar 1.3, so third beat of the first bar, and let's just hear how this sounds. And then we'll have like just quarter notes going in the second bar, and then we'll hit right at the beginning of the third bar, and we can use this as a kind of lead-in at the end of a section. Let me just play it in context so you can kind of hear it. So we can use these 2 bars as the last 2 bars of a phrase, and then this third bar is actually going to be the kind of like the very beginning of the following phrase. You'll see when we arrange this how I kind of use that in the arrangement. And actually, if we want to, we could leave the length of this to just end at the end of bar 3. Or I'm sorry, we want to leave it so it ends at bar 4. But the total length of the clip is 3 bars long. I know it seems like kind of an odd length, but when we start arranging, you'll see how I use that in context. And then I'm going to make one more variation of this where I just have 2 hits at the end here. So we're actually just going to use the pencil tool and single click, get rid of these extra notes. And if we hear this in context, and we're going to, again, use that in the arrangement. So let's just rename these. I'll just rename them 1, 2, and 3, just to kind of keep things simple. So we know they're all different, but they're doing slightly different things. And the last thing we're going to do in this video, if you've been looking at the effects folder that we imported way back early in one of the first videos, you've probably been eyeing that white noise effects and thinking, man, when are we going to use that? Well, now is the time. So we're just going to grab this. We're not going to really do anything in terms of arranging it right now, but we're just going to bring it into the session view so we have it here on a new audio track, because again, we'll be making use of this when we're actually arranging. And just to keep the sound nice and clean when we do arrange this, I'm going to turn the warp function off. This white noise has already been rendered. This came from a synthesizer, and it's been rendered to play back at the right tempo already. So if we have warp on and we leave it warped in beats mode, for example, we're going to be doing something mildly destructive to the audio. So we're just going to leave warp off because this is already timed out exactly how I need it to be timed out. At least it should be. If we need to fix it, we can always turn warp on later. But again, we'll be making use of this when we start arranging in a few videos from now. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next video. We'll move on and we'll organize some stuff and get ready to start arranging.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting, and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.